Today's number 57 most urgent vulnerability is CVE 2026-45112 in Apache Thrift Java bindings. And this one earns a closer look because it is not a flashy data theft bug. It is a service reliability bug, a flaw where resources can be allocated without proper limits or throttling, creating a path to availability loss. On the Daily Ranked CVE Brief, we rank what to patch first, using real exploitation signal, CISA-KEV, first EPSS, and CVSS. This CVE is not on CISA's known exploited vulnerabilities catalog as of this brief, but it does carry a high CVSS score of 7.5 and a notable EPSS percentile of 0.78084. Translation: do not panic, but do not ignore it either. If your environment runs affected Apache Thrift Java bindings on reaching services, this is a practical exposure review and upgrade item. The official NVD description is concise. This is an allocation of resources without limits or throttling vulnerability in Apache Thrift Java bindings. The weakness category is CVE-2026-45112. In plain English, software sometimes has to allocate memory, buffers, objects, threads, or other internal resources while handling input. That is normal. The problem starts when the software can be pushed into allocating too much, too quickly, or without a reasonable boundary. When those limits are missing or ineffective, a remote interaction can become a resource drain. The result is usually not an attacker reading secrets or changing records. The result is that the service becomes slow, unstable, or unavailable. According to the provided NVD data, the affected Apache Thrift range is from 0.19.0 before 0.24.0. and the recommended fixed version is 0.24.0. Verdict: this is a high-severity availability risk because it is remotely reachable and does not require authentication or user interaction. The CVSS vector is 7.5 high, AVN, ACL, PRN, UIN, scope unchanged, with high availability impact, and no listed confidentiality or integrity impact. The two parts that matter most are reachability and consequence. First, network attack vector with low complexity means the vulnerable condition is not limited to local access, and CVSS does not require unusual preconditions. Second, privileges required is none, and user interaction is none, so the model assumes an unauthenticated remote party can trigger the vulnerable behavior without convincing a user to click anything. The impact is availability high. That is why the score lands at 7.5, even though confidentiality and integrity are marked none. CISA-KEV status matters because it separates vulnerabilities known to be exploited in the wild from those that are not yet on that list. CVE 2026-45112 is not listed in CISA-KEV in the data for today's brief, so we should not describe it as confirmed exploited from that source. But the absence of KEV does not mean absence of risk. The EPSS percentile is 0.78084. which places it above many vulnerabilities in predicted exploitation likelihood. Combine that with a network-reachable, no-authentication CVSS profile, and the operational stakes become clear. If an affected Thrift Java service sits behind internal trust boundaries, the danger may be contained. If it is reachable from less trusted networks, a resource exhaustion issue can translate into downtime, failed dependent services, alert storms, and customer-facing errors. Conceptually, the attack path is straightforward, and that is what makes this class of bug important for defenders. A service using affected Apache Thrift Java bindings receives network traffic. If that service is reachable by an unauthenticated party, and if the vulnerable code path processes that traffic in a way that allocates resources without effective limits or throttling, the service can be pushed toward exhaustion. We are not going into exploit mechanics, payloads, or proof-of-concept steps. The defensive takeaway is simpler. Look for places where affected Thrift Java components accept untrusted or semi-trusted requests. Internet exposure is the highest concern, but internal exposure also matters when many systems or users can reach the service. Resource exhaustion bugs often do not need privileged access to create business impact. They just need a path to a component that must keep allocating work. To check exposure, start with inventory. Identify applications, services, and build artifacts that use Apache Thrift. Then narrow that to Java bindings. According to the NVD description provided for this CVE, Apache Thrift from 0.19.0 before 0.24.0 is affected, and users are recommended to upgrade to 0.24.0. Confirm the exact package and version in your dependency manifests, software bills of materials, build files, container images, and deployed runtime artifacts. Then map reachability. Which services using those bindings listen on a network? Which are reachable from the internet, partner networks, user segments, or broad internal networks? Finally, check whether the service is in a critical dependency chain. A medium visibility internal RPC service can still become high priority if many applications depend on it, or if its failure cascades into customer-facing systems. The primary remediation is the one stated in the NVD description. Upgrade Apache Thrift to version 0.24.0, which fixes the issue. Prioritize systems using the affected Java bindings that are network reachable and business critical. If you cannot patch everything immediately, reduce exposure while you schedule the upgrade. That can mean tightening network access, limiting which clients can reach the service, and reviewing gateway or service level controls that enforce reasonable request limits. Use caution here. Compensating controls are not a substitute for the fixed version, but they can reduce risk during rollout. Also coordinate with application owners before changing throttling, because overly aggressive limits can create their own outages. The goal is measured containment. Patch the vulnerable dependency, reduce unnecessary reachability, and confirm the service behaves normally under expected load after the update. For monitoring, focus on symptoms consistent with resource exhaustion. Establish what normal looks like for each Thrift-based service: request volume, latency, error rate, memory usage, garbage collection behavior if applicable, restart frequency, and timeout patterns. Then look for deviations. A suspicious pattern might be a sudden rise in resource consumption without a matching rise in legitimate business activity, repeated service restarts, growing latency, increased timeouts, or error spikes from downstream clients. If your logs record request source, route, method, or size metadata, compare those fields against baseline behavior, but avoid assuming one single signature. This CVE is described as allocation without limits or throttling, so defenders should watch the system-level consequences as much as application-level logs. If alerts fire, preserve logs, capture timing, identify exposed endpoints, and verify whether affected versions are present before jumping to conclusions. To recap, CVE 2026-45112 is today's number 57 most urgent vulnerability on our ranked list. It affects Apache Thrift Java bindings, is categorized as CVE-770, and carries a 7.5 high CVSS score because it is network reachable, low complexity, requires no privileges or user interaction, and can have high availability impact. It is not listed in CISA-CAV in today's data, but the EPSS percentile and the unauthenticated network profile make it worth action, especially for exposed or critical services. Your practical plan is inventory, confirm affected versions, prioritize reachable deployments, upgrade to Apache Thrift 0.24.0, and monitor for resource exhaustion symptoms. This is the Daily Ranked CVE Brief. What to patch first, ranked by real exploitation signal every day. Subscribe for the next ranked brief, and see the full ranked report linked in the description.